A news anchor loses her cool on live TV when President Trump storms into the studio to defend his controversial budget bill, leading to a fiery debate that leaves everyone stunned. We're live on the news set. Cameras rolling, the bright studio lights beaming down as Melissa Hartwell sits at the anchor desk, her earpiece buzzing with instructions from the control room. Across from her is Senator Ron Johnson, a MAGA Republican from Wisconsin, his expression serious as he adjusts his tie, ready to dive into the hot topic of the day. The chyron at the bottom of the screen reads, Budget Bill Battle, President Trump's Plan Under Fire. Melissa looks into the camera, her voice steady, professional, and welcoming. Good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us on News. I'm Melissa Hartwell, and tonight we're diving into the latest controversy surrounding President Trump's budget bill, which he's called a big, beautiful plan for America's future, but not everyone agrees, especially some within his own party. Joining me now is Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Senator, thanks for being here. Thank you, Melissa. Glad to be on, Ron says, nodding politely, his hands clasped on the desk. Melissa leans forward slightly, her tone sharp but composed. Senator, let's get right to it. President Trump has been pushing this budget bill hard, saying it's going to fix the economy, secure the border, and set us up for long-term success. But you've been vocal about your concerns. What's the problem with this bill? Ron takes a deep breath, his voice firm, carrying the weight of his frustration. Well, Melissa, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Unfortunately, President Trump chose the wrong approach here. He went with this one big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, when what we really needed was a multi-step process. I suggested 3 steps: get the border funding first, then extend the current tax law to avoid an automatic tax increase, and finally, tackle spending at a reasonable, pre-pandemic level. But this bill, it's a mess, and there's enough of us in the Senate who won't agree to it as it stands. Melissa nods, her expression neutral, but you can tell she's trying to steer the conversation. So, you're saying the Senate won't pass this bill in its current form? Not a chance, Ron says, shaking his head. Not if we don't bring spending down to a reasonable level. There's no way we're getting this done before Memorial Day, and frankly, I don't see it happening by the end of the year either, unless something changes. Melissa presses on, her voice a little sharper now. But Senator, the President has been touting this bill as a game changer, saying it's exactly what the American people need. Are you suggesting he's out of touch with what's actually feasible in Congress? Ron doesn't hesitate, his tone blunt. I'm saying he should have listened to those of us who've been in the Senate long enough to know how this works. One big bill sounds great in a speech, but in reality, it's a disaster. We're still passing these ridiculous continuing resolutions that carry out Nancy Pelosi's budget, and don't even get me started on how DOJ is violating the Constitution with some of these moves. Melissa's eyes widen slightly, but she keeps her composure, trying to pivot. Let's talk about the economy for a moment, because despite the budget concerns, we did get a jobs report today that showed 177,000 jobs added in April, which is better than expected. Doesn't that prove the president's point that the economy is doing well under his leadership? Before Ron can respond, there's a commotion off camera, a loud voice echoing through the studio that makes everyone freeze. I heard that, Melissa, and I'm not going to let you spin this without me setting the record straight. Melissa turns her head, her face a mix of shock and confusion, as President Donald Trump strides onto the set, his red tie swinging, his expression a mix of determination and frustration. The control room erupts into chaos, producers shouting through Melissa's earpiece, but she's too stunned to respond immediately. Trump walks right up to the desk, pointing a finger at the camera as he speaks. I was backstage, watching this, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing, Trump says, his voice booming, commanding the room. This bill, my bill, is the best thing for America, and I'm not going to let Ron here, or anyone else, tell the American people otherwise. It's tremendous, it's fantastic, and it's going to make our country stronger than ever. Melissa finally finds her voice, her tone a little shaky as she tries to regain control. Mr. President, this is, an unexpected surprise. We weren't expecting you on the set, but since you're here, let's talk about this bill. Senator Johnson was just saying. Trump cuts her off, waving a hand dismissively. I heard what Ron was saying, and let me tell you something, he's wrong, okay? Totally wrong. This multi-step nonsense he's talking about, that's small thinking. I don't do small thinking. I do big, I do bold, and this bill is bold. It's got everything. Border security, tax cuts, infrastructure, you name it. The American people love it. They're calling me saying, "Mr. President, this is the best bill we've ever seen." Ron leans forward, his voice steady but clearly irritated. With all due respect, Mr. President, that's not what I'm hearing from my constituents. They're worried about the spending in this bill, and frankly, so am I. We can't just throw money at problems and hope they go away. That's not how the Senate works, and you know that. Trump turns to Ron, his eyes narrowing slightly, but his tone still confident. Ron, you're a good guy. I like you, but you're missing the point. This bill isn't about throwing money around, it's about investing in America. We're talking jobs, we're talking security, we're talking about making sure our country doesn't fall apart like it did under Biden. You saw those GDP numbers, negative 0.3%, a disaster, total disaster, all because of Biden's economy. But now, under me, we're turning it around. 177,000 jobs, like Melissa said, better than expected. That's me. That's my leadership. Melissa jumps in, trying to keep the segment on track. Mr. President, let's talk about those jobs numbers for a second. Some critics, including Democrats, are saying your administration is taking credit for economic gains that started under President Biden, who had record job growth and low unemployment. How do you respond to that? Trump scoffs, shaking his head. Critics, always the critics, Melissa. Let me tell you something. Biden didn't do anything for this country except leave me with a mess. $2 trillion in debt, highest peacetime deficits in history, a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. We weren't making anything. Nothing. I inherited that, and now I'm fixing it. Those jobs, 177,000, that's because of me, because of my policies, my tariffs, my vision. People are working again. They're happy. They're thanking me. Ron shakes his head, his voice rising slightly. That's not the whole story, Mr. President. You can't just take credit for the jobs and ignore the budget issues. This bill you're pushing, it's not realistic. We need a plan that the Senate can actually pass, not a fantasy that sounds good on TV. Trump turns to Ron, his tone sharper now. Fantasy? You think I'm living in a fantasy, Ron? I'm the one who's been out there, talking to the American people, hearing what they want. They don't want your three-step plan, they want action, they want results, and that's what I'm giving them. You've got one job in Congress, pass legislation that helps people, not sit there and complain about my bill. Melissa raises a hand, her voice a little louder as she tries to mediate. Gentlemen, let's keep this focused. Senator, let me ask you, if this bill doesn't pass, what's the alternative? Are we just going to keep relying on continuing resolutions, as you mentioned earlier? Ron nods, his tone firm. That's exactly what I'm worried about, Melissa. If we don't get this right, we're stuck with those resolutions, carrying out budgets from years ago that don't work for today's challenges. But this bill, as it stands, isn't the answer. We need to break it down, make it manageable, make it something we can actually get through the Senate. Trump waves a hand, cutting in again. Manageable, manageable. That's all I hear from you, Ron. You know what's manageable? Doing nothing, that's manageable. I didn't get elected to do nothing. I got elected to make America great again. And that's what this bill does. It's strong, it's powerful, and it's going to happen, whether you like it or not. Melissa's earpiece buzzes again, and she glances at the camera, her voice a little strained. Mr. President, Senator, we're getting a lot of feedback from viewers right now, and there's a concern about mixed messaging. Just this week, some of your allies, like J.D. Vance, were saying the economy is still struggling because of Biden's policies, while others are saying it's booming under your leadership. Can you clarify that for our audience? Trump leans forward, his voice booming again. Look, it's very simple, Melissa. The economy was a disaster when I took over. Everybody knows that. Biden left us with nothing, just debt and problems. But now, because of me, we're seeing growth, we're seeing jobs, we're seeing energy prices go down. I heard Scott Bessent say gas is at $1.93 in parts of Florida. That's an automatic tax cut for the American people. That's my economy. That's my success. Ron shakes his head, his frustration clear. That's not what the GDP numbers say, Mr. President. Negative 0.3%. That's contraction, not growth. You can't just cherry-pick the jobs report and ignore the bigger picture. Trump points at Ron, his voice rising. You want to talk about the bigger picture, Ron? The bigger picture is I'm the one fighting for the American people while you're sitting in the Senate, holding things up. You don't like the bill? Fine. Come up with something better, but don't tell me I'm not doing my job. Melissa's voice cracks as she tries to interject, her patience wearing thin. Gentlemen, please, we need to... But Trump keeps going, his tone unrelenting. And let me say this, Melissa. I'm tired of hearing about mixed messaging. You know what's mixed? News. 1 minute you're saying I'm doing great. The next minute you're letting Ron here trash my bill. Pick a side, okay? I'm doing the best for this country, and I'm not going to let anyone stop me. Melissa finally snaps, her voice louder than she intended, her professionalism slipping. Mr. President, with all due respect, it's hard to keep up when your own team can't get the story straight. One day it's Biden's fault. The next day you're taking credit, and now we're stuck in the middle trying to make sense of it. The studio goes silent for a moment, the weight of her outburst hanging in the air. Trump stares at her, his expression unreadable, while Ron looks down at the desk, clearly uncomfortable. Melissa's earpiece buzzes again, and she can hear the producer shouting, "Cut to commercial, cut to commercial." Trump stands up, adjusting his jacket, his voice calm but firm. I think I've said what I needed to say, Melissa. The American people know the truth. They know I'm fighting for them. You and Ron can figure out the rest. With that, Trump turns and walks off the set, his footsteps echoing as he disappears behind the cameras. Melissa sits there, her face pale, trying to regain her composure as the camera zooms in. She forces a smile, her voice shaky. Well, that was quite a moment here on News. We're going to take a quick break, but stay with us. We'll be right back. The screen fades to black as the segment cuts to commercial, leaving the news set in a stunned silence, the debate still ringing in everyone's ears. If you thought that was intense, make sure to hit subscribe for more moments like this on Stately Stories, and let us know what you think in the comments below.